Hello, my dove. Are you ready for story time? Well, this one is going to be a little different than the ones that you remember. You may think you know the story of Snow White, but what if everything was not as it seemed, and there were just a few who knew the true story behind the fairy tale? Well, I've got it all right here in this lovely little book. And yes, this one was actually written by me. So snuggle up, get comfy, and let's begin reading. Long ago, in a faraway land, there was an enchanted kingdom full of wonder and light. The king and queen were noble and just, and their people flourished during their reign. They had one child, a beloved little girl named Snow White. The baby was born with her father's dark hair, but her mother's bright eyes and fair skin and perfect rosy cheeks. However, fortune is fickle, and one day a great tragedy struck. The queen and Snow White were attacked after touring a village at the northern edge of their kingdom, the entire caravan butchered by bandits. The villagers who discovered the scene said it must have been Snow's pure, innocent beauty that saved her, for she was the only survivor of the vicious attack. The poor child was so in shock that the king cloistered her away for months, and when she finally emerged about the palace, her countenance was more pale and drawn than before, and she hardly spoke above a whisper. Nevertheless, as time passed, word of her beauty grew and spread amongst the surrounding kingdoms. Many royals and dignitaries traveled to visit the king with the hopes of getting a mere glimpse of the princess. One of these visitors was the widow queen of the north, an enchanting beauty in her own right, who captured the king's attention. With her discerning wit and piercing gaze. After sharing many long evenings discussing politics, art, and the cruelties of life, a grand announcement was made. The two were to be wed, and their kingdoms become the closest of allies. The king had many facets in his desire for a wife, as Snow White was approaching marriageable age, and he had struggled to keep a governess with her for more than a handful of months at a time. Each one had, funnily enough, left nearly identical notes stating that they had found love and were eloping to the southern countryside to start families. Therefore, he hoped the queen and her lady's maid could assist in teaching Snow the finer points of running a kingdom, etiquette, and deportment, among other ladylike duties, as her talents for reading, writing, and the arts were already quite developed. Indeed, several diplomats had testified to hearing Snow sing in the gardens just after sundown, a delightful, if haunting, song full of sorrows. For a time, all was well in the kingdom, with the king, queen, and Snow White painting a loving, if strained, picture of a happy family. But tragedy struck again, as it often does, and the beloved king was brought down by a bear on a hunting excursion just days before the fall harvest celebration. The queen designated the expansion and renovation of the largest inn to receive all of the incoming nobles, so they may stay near the castle, but outside the grounds. And she sat in mourning with the king's body for 3 days. Snow White's desolate wails could be heard from her suite in the West Tower, though none saw her, save the queen's handmaid and most trusted advisor. During the king's official interment in the royal crypt, the queen stood, veiled and stone-faced, clutching a leather wristband with her kingdom's silver seal that the late king had worn since the day they met. Her lady's maid and advisor stood behind her, resolute as ever, as foreign royalty and local farmers alike paid their respects to the king's memory. With the king's death, the queen took up strange habits. Come sundown, she sent all of the staff home, save her own 2, assuring the others that her people could care for themselves and Snow until daybreak the next morning. She also permitted no visitors to the castle grounds during this time. All royal business had to be conducted between morning tea and the beginning of supper. Snow White appeared as nothing more than a wraith, wandering between her tower and the library, cloaked in black, with heavy veils of mourning on, speaking a word to nobody. The morning before the fall festival was to occur, the queen canceled all appointments for the day, encouraging all of the visiting dignitaries to spread their coin about the bustling city around the castle. She then hastened to the hidden chamber beneath the royal suite, her lady's maid in tow, and stayed there for hours, no sounds permeating the thick stone of the hidden cellar. Hours later, she emerged, dismissing the staff for the evening and assembling a tray of tea and finger sandwiches before heading towards Snow's tower. By the light of the full moon zenith, a figure could be seen riding out from the castle stables with a large bundle in front of him. The queen's most loyal advisor, a former hunter who had worked his way up the ranks and into her good graces in the northern kingdom, was galloping as hard as possible out of town and along the road toward the border between the kingdoms. His face was drawn into hard lines as he spurred his stallion on faster toward the raging river that divided the 2 lands. With scant miles to go, the path narrowed through a heavy wood, and the trees seemed to lean in over him, catching at his clothing and horse's flanks as he charged ahead. He could barely make out the wide wooden bridge and its guardsmen ahead when Snow White surged to life before him, throwing off the blanket covering her with a snarl. The huntsman raised his arm to grab at her shoulder, but a tree branch hanging low ripped his leather wristband away, the one identical to the late king's that bore the silver seal of the northern kingdom. With a triumphant sneer, Snow White hissed and slashed at his chest, cutting him open wide, before diving away from his horse and sprinting into the deep woods. He had no choice but to give up pursuit and ride forward toward the bridge and its guards, bleeding profusely from the gashes she gave him. All of the guards on both sides of the bridge were trained by the Queen's elite private force, and the captain pulled the huntsman into the guard tower for care as one of them took a fresh horse and rode straight for the Queen's castle with the news of the mission's failure. Word reached the Queen within a few short hours, and she immediately roused her lady's maid and descended into her private chamber, gathering the extra potions they had brewed the night before in preparation for this outcome. The lady's maid went out to the back orchard and procured the juiciest red apple from the highest branches of the oldest trees and brought it down to the Queen, where she dipped it into her effervescent cauldron. As she pulled up the apple by the stem, the potion dripped away, leaving the shadow of a deathly skull, a portent of what was to come. The Queen took a bundle of worn clothes from her maid, and an additional vial, and the apple, then rode out to the bridge on her own mighty steed, tucking it away in their secluded stable. Once hidden, she drank deeply of the vial, turning her body into a withered old crone, and donned the worn and holy robes her maid had given her. Then she set out in the direction Snow White had fled, according to her huntsman, sprinkling enchanted dust from her pockets before her to highlight her path. After hours of walking, the Queen came upon a secluded clearing that housed a humble cottage. A well-worn dirt path led toward the mountains and the old gemstone mines that were rumored to be claimed by dwarves. Hunkering down among the shadows of the trees and brush, the Queen waited for a glimpse of her quarry. After dusk settled, the Queen saw lights in the cottage windows and the shadowy face of Snow White moving about within, preparing a stew of sorts for dinner. Knowing she would have less opportunity when the other occupants of the dwelling returned, she hobbled to the door, knocking softly as an old woman should. When Snow answered, she schooled her features to be the picture of humility as she warbled, "My dear, could you spare assistance to an old crone lost in the woods?" The Queen knew that Snow was most beloved by all of the kingdom, so she was heavy-handed in her adoration. "Oh, you look so much like our most beautiful princess. My lady, you must truly be blessed." Rambling on, she said, "I have become separated from my darling daughter and the rest of our harvest group, and I only need directions back to the road to our fair capital. In exchange, I'll give you the juiciest apple of the season." She dangled the poison apple in front of her, the last rays of sunlight glinting off of its skin. With a sweet smile, Snow reached out and accepted the treat with a murmur of thanks as she pointed to the south corner of the clearing, playing the part of the perfect darling. Continuing her ruse, the Queen said, "If you cut this apple into 9 pieces and eat 8 of them while glancing into a mirror, the face of your true love will appear. Just throw the ninth slice over your shoulder while looking straight into the reflection steps. Oh, and you must do it alone, so quickly now, before the miners come home. Thank you again for humoring an older woman, my dear. She hobbled away into the tree line and ducked behind a large trunk, waiting for the click of the cottage door behind Snow White. Pausing for a few seconds, she crept back up to the house, peeking through a sliver of window, as Snow White sliced the apple deftly onto a plate and carried it over to the small mirror propped up on a washstand. As a child, Snow White had naturally been infatuated with stories of princesses finding their princes and true love. The hidden figure watched with bated breath as Snow White lifted the first slice of apple to her lips and bit it in half. Then there was a crash as Snow's body crumpled to the floor, the plate shattering at her feet. The queen hurriedly cast off her magical disguise and pushed into the cottage, dragging the princess out by her arms toward the trees. There was a faint echo of whistling and boots stomping up the path, spurring her on to work quickly. Drawing the last potion from her pocket, she walked a full circle around Snow's body, backing away as thorny vines and roots surrounded her and lifted her up to create a natural mausoleum, an enchanted glass case sliding into place around her pristine figure. The queen pulled up her hood and sprinted into the woods, back toward her horse, as the anguished screams of the miners reached her. The poison coating on the apple was a powerful sleeping draught that could keep the strongest of vampires in a permanent stasis, and had been crafted from the fallen king's own blood, rendering it even more potent. Riding back to her castle, the queen sighed, the fingers of her left hand rubbing against the king's leather band on her right wrist, the twin to her own silver amulet. There was nothing to do now but wait and pray. The queen sent 2 letters after arriving home. One to her cousin, who was steward of her kingdom to the north, and the second to the guard tower and barracks at the river crossing. Her kingdom was skilled in dealing with the vampire scourge, as their mountainous climbs got less sun than their southern counterparts and afforded many caves for them to hide out. Even the medallions the queen's subjects wore had been cast of pure silver and engraved with sigils that would repel the vampire's touch. The raging river that cut her kingdom off from the rest of them had served as a natural barrier against all but the strongest of their kind. Indeed, the only notable attack in her lifetime was the one that took Snow White's mother and turned Snow into the most cunning creature she had ever faced, feeding off of her maids, governesses, and her own father for years before the queen was able to get silver amulets on them. After bidding her maid and huntsman good night, the queen climbed the stairs to her chamber, weary to her core. Drawing herself a hot bath, the queen soaked in her large tub, the moon illuminating her private rooms with a silvery glow. She dunked her head under the water briefly, resurfacing just in time to hear the scrape of stones against each other. Climbing out of the tub, she swiftly dove for the 4-poster bed and the sword beneath it, stopping short at the feeling of razor-sharp nails against her throat. No, Her throat constricted on the sound as a chilling laugh sounded behind her. I'm afraid you've underestimated me, dear stepmother, but that was an admirable attempt to lock me away. If only you'd known that the prince I've been promised to since birth is madly in love with me. Getting him to follow my minor friends to my grave and kiss me awake after the thorns had scratched his face bloody took no effort at all. True love's kiss breaks any curse, right? With a derisive snort, Snow flipped the queen to her back, enjoying the look of shock on her face. I'd love to stay and chat, but I'm not naive enough to give you any more opportunities to best me. Her claws ripped across the queen's float, clearly beheading her in a single pass. With a second slash, Snow lifted her head by the hair and stalked down to the great hall. She bowled the disembodied head toward the front door, which slammed open, revealing the prince and 7 minors sporting identical red eyes. Stalking up to the throne dais, the blood-spattered princess settled into the grander seat as the minors spread out to dispatch the lady's maid and huntsman. The young prince knelt before Snow, kissing her hand reverently before rising to stand at her shoulder. Long live the queen. How do we seem to you? Do you find us beautiful and magical? Our white skin, our fierce eyes. Drink, you ask me. Do you have any idea of the things you will become? Anne Rice. Our publisher chose that quote to end my section of the book, with an ode to the great Anne Rice, queen of all vampires. If you want to read some of the other delightfully twisted tales in this book, I'll include a link down below. All profits go to a non-profit organization that contributes to youth writing to encourage the arts among young children. Sleep well, my pets, and don't be afraid of what's in the dark.